Whispers travel differently in the world of war. They do not move through newspapers or broadcasts, but through half-finished sentences exchanged in bunkers, through classified cables with redacted names, through the low mutter of soldiers who have seen too much and trust too little. In those whispers, one name kept resurfacing: Falcon. No one knew if it was a code or a person. Some said she was an algorithm created in a Pentagon lab, a machine that could read battlefield patterns faster than satellites. Others swore she was a woman who had appeared in one war zone after another, slipping across borders with no passport, no country, and no loyalty except to the fight itself. Whatever the truth, Falcon's shadow seemed to pass over missions that succeeded against impossible odds. For the Navy SEALs, legends meant nothing. They lived in a world where bullets shredded myths in seconds, where survival depended on muscle, instinct, and trust in the man beside you. And yet, even among them, the names surfaced enough to spark curiosity. A sniper once mentioned that an entire convoy in Syria had been spared thanks to an unofficial consultant who noticed a detail everyone else missed. A demolitions expert in Afghanistan swore that a voice over comms had saved his life by predicting the placement of an eyed to within 10 feet. None of these soldiers had ever seen her, but each story ended with the same title: Falcon. The higher the rank, the deeper the silence. Commanders, analysts, even CIA handlers, when the name came up, their voices tightened. Some avoided eye contact altogether. To the operators, that silence meant one thing: Falcon was real, and she was important enough to be protected. Still, legends don't breathe. Legends don't bleed. Legends don't walk into a briefing room and stand before you. That was why the SEALs were unprepared for what awaited them at Langley. The team had returned from a grueling deployment just weeks before. Their days blurred together. Recovery drills, weapons maintenance, classified debriefs in gray rooms where the air smelled faintly of sweat and antiseptic. Rest was a foreign word in their dictionary. So when the call came to assemble for a special assignment, they didn't ask questions. Orders were oxygen. You followed them, or you suffocated. Commander Hayes, their team leader, scanned the faces of his men as they filed into the briefing chamber. Hardened warriors, each with years of experience stitched into their scar tissue. They had been through ambushes, midnight raids, helicopter crashes, and gunfights in streets that smelled of blood and gasoline. They trusted no one outside their circle. And yet here they were, being asked to listen to an unknown advisor. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a projector screen. Maps of a desert region stretched across the wall, dotted with red markers. At first, no one noticed the woman at the far end of the table. She stood still, arms crossed, her figure hidden under a plain black jacket. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. "This," the CIA handler announced, "is Falcon." The silence that followed was almost mocking. The SEALs looked at one another, smirks forming at the corners of their mouths. This woman? Their legendary Falcon? She looked more like a tired analyst dragged out of an office. She had no insignia, no stripes, no scars they could see. Just those eyes sharp, unflinching, as if they were dissecting every man in the room. Falcon stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You've all read the mission profile. What you don't know is that half of it is wrong." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Wrong?" Intel came straight from satellite feeds. "Satellites miss what people hide," she replied, tapping the map. Her finger hovered over a cluster of villages. "Convoys don't move on predictable paths anymore. They adapt. They disguise themselves as wedding parties, funerals, farming caravans. You can track heat signatures, but you won't see the shift in behavior unless you've lived among it. These people don't just vanish into sand. They create patterns. and patterns can be read. The room grew quiet. The SEALs weren't easily impressed, but the way she spoke carried weight. Not the weight of authority, but of experience. Hayes leaned back in his chair. So what are you saying? You've been there? Falcon's lips curved into the faintest smile. I've been everywhere. Rumors were one thing. Seeing her was another. There was nothing extraordinary about Falcon, at first glance. No medals, no scars, no air of superiority. Yet she carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had survived storms no one else in the room could imagine. Her eyes flicked across maps with surgical precision, her hand moving with certainty as she drew out supply lines that weren't on any chart. Some SEALs scoffed under their breath. Others listened more carefully than they cared to admit. Hayes, though skeptical, felt something stir. This wasn't guesswork. She was pointing to truths they hadn't yet seen. Falcon spoke again. You're going into hostile territory with limited visibility. The enemy knows you're coming. They want you to rely on tech. They want you blind in the sand. But I see them. I see how they move, how they breathe. I will guide you. Whether you listen, that's up to you. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Later, as the team filed out of the chamber, whispers spread. She's not military. How the hell does she know all that? One muttered. Probably just another intel puppet. Another grumbled. But deep down, a sliver of doubt had shifted. What if the stories were true? Hayes stayed behind for a moment, watching Falcon gather her files. Falcon, he said, testing the weight of the name. Why do they call you that? She looked up, her gaze steady. Because I see what others don't. Outside, the sun dipped low over Langley, painting the horizon in gold. The SEALs returned to their quarters, restless. Somewhere between myth and reality, Falcon now existed, not just as a whisper, but as flesh and blood. They didn't trust her, not yet, but they would follow orders. And in the days to come, they would learn that her name was not a code, not a legend, not a rumor. It was a warning. A falcon circles above its prey long before the strike. And once it dives, nothing escapes. The corridors of Langley were always the same cold gray and humming with fluorescent light. Men and women in suits walked briskly, their eyes fixed forward, conversations clipped and coded. For outsiders, the CIA headquarters was a maze of secrets. For the SEALs who stepped inside that morning, it felt like stepping into enemy territory without a weapon. They preferred sand, mud, and the smell of gun oil. But orders were orders, and Langley had summoned them. Commander Hayes led the team through security. Their weapons had been surrendered at the gate, their knives and gadgets sealed in lockers. Stripped of steel, they felt exposed. Operators were trained to adapt, but the absence of weight on their hips and shoulders left them restless. The handler, a thin man in a gray suit with eyes that darted like a rat's, guided them deeper into the building. Briefings on Sublevel 3, sensitive, compartmentalized. Only you and her. Her? One SEAL muttered under his breath. The handler didn't reply. The room was stark, more bunker than conference chamber. A long table stretched across the center, maps and satellite images projected onto the far wall. The hum of machines filled the silence. Waiting at the far end, standing with her arms behind her back, was the woman they had glimpsed before Falcon. The SEALs filed in, their boots echoing. Hayes caught the first flicker of unease ripple through his men. It wasn't fear. These were warriors who had stared death in the face too many times. It was something harder to define resentment. Soldiers earned their place with sweat and scars. Falcon, to them, was an interloper. The handler cleared his throat. Gentlemen, your mission is unconventional. High-value target, buried deep. Intelligence gaps too wide for standard outplanning. That's where Falcon comes in. All eyes turned to her. She didn't flinch. Falcon stepped forward, her voice level, clipped and precise. You'll be deploying into the El Hadid corridor. On the surface, you'll see sand, broken villages, and scattered convoys. But look closer, and you'll see arteries feeding a network. Fuel, weapons, food, men, each route disguised, each pattern hidden in plain sight. One SEAL leaned back, crossing his arms. We've seen this kind of briefing before. Intel's never perfect. What makes you different? Her gaze locked onto him, steady and unblinking. Because I don't read what satellites tell me. I read what men hide. Your enemies adapt faster than your machines. They mask their convoys as weddings. They bury weapons in funeral processions. They know how you think. I know how they live. The room fell quiet. She tapped the projector remote, zooming in on a grainy satellite image of a village market. To most eyes, it was chaos stalls, crowds, livestock. But Falcon's finger traced across the scene with certainty. See this cart? Wheat, supposedly. Look at the spacing of the sacks, too even, too rigid. That's ordnance in disguise. Hear this line of goats? Watch the shadows. The animals are tethered, not herded, which means they're blocking a route, funneling traffic into a kill zone. Satellites don't catch that. People do. The SEALs shifted uneasily. They were no strangers to traps, but hearing them laid out like a puzzle by someone who had never stepped onto the battlefield unsettled. Them. Hayes broke the silence. So you expect us to follow your voice out there? Let you call the shots? Falcon shook her head. No, you call the shots. I just make sure you see the battlefield as it really is. Think of me as altitude eyes. Above the fight, the metaphor landed. A falcon circling the desert skies, watching prey from above. Hayes caught himself staring at her, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who was she? Analyst, spy, survivor? Hours passed as Falcon walked them through scenarios. Each detail, she revealed, chipped away at their doubt. She spoke of things she couldn't have known unless she had lived among the locals, how tea left. Brewing too long in certain villages was a signal. How a child's kite could mark sniper positions. How a woman's scarf tied a certain way meant safe passage. These aren't guesses, she explained. They're patterns. The battlefield talks, if you listen. At one point, SEAL named Morales leaned forward, frustration on his face. All right then, tell me this. What about when it's bullets in your face? When everything goes to hell? You gonna tell me the scarf code while my brothers bleed out? Falcon didn't blink. If I'm doing my job, you won't be in that kill zone to begin with. The answer hung in the air like a hammer blow. Morales said nothing more. When the briefing ended, the handler dismissed them with a wave. The SEALs stood, gathering their notes. The usual banter was missing. They left in silence, each man processing what he had seen. Hayes lingered, watching Falcon organize her files. She moved quickly, methodically, no wasted motion. Finally, he spoke. Falcon, he said, his voice low. Why are you here? People like you don't walk into rooms like this. They stay in the shadows. She paused, lifting her eyes to his. For a moment, he thought she might dodge the question. Instead, she answered with unnerving calm. Because shadows don't win wars. People do. Hayes studied her. There was no arrogance in her tone, only certainty. He had worked with men who boasted endlessly about their skills, about their kills. Falcon didn't need to. Her confidence came from somewhere else, somewhere darker, perhaps. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. We'll see. The team regrouped later in their quarters, the air thick with tension. Conversations broke out in hushed tones. She's a spook, that's all. No way she's the real deal. You heard her. She knew things no one should have known. Or she's feeding us staged intel to make herself look good. Hayes let them argue, watching in silence. He knew trust wasn't given easily in their world. It was earned, forged, in fire and blood. And Falcon hadn't bled with them. Not yet. But something gnawed at him. The way she had read that marketplace photo, the way she had spoken of the hidden codes of war, those weren't tricks. Those were truths. Hayes had spent too many years in battlefields to mistake guesswork for instinct. And instinct told him. Falcon was dangerous, not as an enemy, but as a force. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his bunk, replaying the briefing in his head. The desert corridor, the disguised convoys, the hidden patterns. He thought of the countless times. His team had walked blind into chaos, relying on intel that cracked the moment boots hit sand. What if she really could see more? What if she really could keep his men alive? Hayes rubbed his temples. Trusting a civilian went against every grain of his being. But something told him this was no ordinary civilian. Somewhere deep down, he already knew Falcon wasn't a myth. She was real. And soon, the Navy SEALs would learn exactly what her name meant. The desert is a liar. From the air, it looks empty, barren, harmless. But those who walk its surface know better. The sand hides paths, caches, even entire networks. Heat distorts the horizon, tricking the eyes. Villages rise and fall like mirages. For centuries, armies had marched into deserts, thinking them blank spaces to be conquered, only to be swallowed whole. The SEALs knew this. They had fought in jungles, mountains, and city streets, but the desert was its own kind of predator. Now, their boots sank into its shifting skin, and for the first time, a civilian voice guided them. Falcon. They had deployed under cover of darkness, parachuting from a transport plane into the Al-Hadid corridor. The air was thin, sharp with, cold, and yet the sand beneath their boots radiated yesterday's heat. Each man moved with silent precision, their gear tightly packed, rifles slung across their chests. Commander Hayes kept the formation tight, scanning every shadow. The moon hung low, a silver coin in a sea of black, throwing faint light across the ridges. The desert was quiet, but quiet never meant safe. In Hayes' ear, the cum crackled. Falcon's voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the static. 2 clicks east, you'll find a ridge line. Stay below it. Convoy passed there 3 hours ago. Dust is still settling. Hayes motioned with his hand. The SEALs shifted east without hesitation. Some had been skeptical of her back in Langley, but in the field, skepticism had no weight. Orders mattered. Information mattered. And so far, Falcon's words carried both. They climbed a dune, their boots sinking, their breaths steady. At the crest, Hayes paused, peering down. Sure enough, faint tire tracks etched the sand. To the untrained eye, they would have looked like a natural sweep of wind. But Falcon had seen them from a screen hundreds of miles away. One SEAL muttered under his breath, "How the hell does she do that?" No one answered. The mission was simple on paper. Identify and disrupt the supply lines feeding a local warlord's growing network. The reality was far from simple. The corridor was a labyrinth of smuggling routes disguised as civilian traffic. Each convoy carried the possibility of weapons shipments, or worse, suicide bombers. Intercepting them meant walking a razor's edge between military objective and civilian tragedy. Falcon's job was to help them distinguish one from the other. Village ahead, her voice came again. Half a mile. Too quiet. Avoid main. Road. Skirt south. The SEALs adjusted course, moving low. Hayes caught the faint flicker of lanterns in the distance. A cluster of huts. A well. A few tethered animals. No movement. Too quiet, just as she'd said. They passed without incident, but Hayes' gut twisted. He had seen villages like that before, empty, waiting. Sometimes it was an ambush. Sometimes it was worse. Families used as bait. He clenched his jaw and pressed forward. Hours dragged. The desert tested them with its silence, with the weight of their packs, with the endless repetition of sand. But Falcon's voice kept them sharp. She pointed out details no drone could have captured. The faint reflection of glass that meant a sniper's perch. The odd rhythm of a torchlight flickering in a cave. The sound of distant dogs barking in sequence. An old trick used to signal movement. Each time, Hayes signaled his men to adjust, and each time they avoided detection. By dawn, even the most doubtful operator began to feel it. She wasn't guessing. She was seeing. But the desert always bites back. It began with a sound faint, metallic, carried by the wind. Hayes froze, raising his fist. The team dropped low, rifles up, scanning. Nothing. Just sand and stone. Then, a whisper in his ear. North Ridge, 6 men. Camouflage nets. Wait. Hayes' pulse quickened. He trusted his own eyes, but Falcon's words rang with certainty. He held his men still, crouched in the sand, every muscle coiled. Minutes crawled by. The sun crept higher, shadows shifting. Then movement barely visible. A sliver of fabric flapped against stone. A rifle barrel glinted. 6 men, exactly where Falcon had said. The SEALs exchanged glances. If they had kept moving, they would have walked straight into fire. Hayes whispered into Combs. Falcon. What's their position? Ambush. They're waiting for you to crest. Circle west. Keep low. You'll flank them. The SEALs moved like ghosts, circling wide, their boots silent in the sand. They came up behind the ridge, rifles raised. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. 6 men down. Not a single SEAL scratched. That night, huddled in a wadi, Morales broke the silence. I'll say it, she saved our asses. The others nodded reluctantly. Even Hayes, though silent, couldn't deny it. Falcon had been right, again. Over Combs, her voice came one last time before they slept. Good work today, rest. Tomorrow will be harder. There was something in her tone calm, but waited, as if she saw not just the battlefield, but the future. Hayes lay awake, staring at the stars scattered above the desert. He thought of Falcon's words back at Langley. I see what others don't. Tonight, he believed her. But belief in the desert was dangerous. And Hayes knew the desert had a way of breaking belief into dust. By the next morning, the SEALs moved. With a different energy. They still doubted her origins, her right to be in their circle, but they no longer doubted her eyes. And slowly, silently, without realizing it, they began to move not just as a team of warriors, but as a team guided by something new, something circling above them, something watching, something called Falcon. The desert had its own language, and the SEALs were learning it fast. Every shadow carried meaning, every silence held weight. Falcon had guided them through ambushes and traps, but war was never patient. War waited until men believed themselves. Safe then, it struck. Dusk bled across the owl-hotted corridor like spilled ink, painting the dunes in red and black. The SEALs were pushing through a narrow valley, ridges rising steep on either side. Hayes didn't like it. The air felt too still, the silence too deep. Valleys were kill zones, and every instinct screamed at him to get out. Then it began. The first shot cracked through the stillness, echoing like thunder against the cliffs. Dust exploded near Morale's boots. Before he could react, another shot rang out, then another. Muzzle flashes flickered across the ridge line. The valley lit up with fire. Contact, North Ridge. Hayes barked, his voice cutting through. Chaos. The SEALs dove for cover, sliding behind rocks, rifles snapping up. The air filled with the roar of gunfire, tracer rounds carving fiery arcs in the twilight. But this was no random skirmish. It was an ambush coordinated, planned, lethal. Dozens of fighters lined the cliffs, pinning the SEALs in a crossfire. Hayes cursed under his breath. Too exposed. Too many angles. We're trapped. Then, through the chaos, Falcon's voice came over Combs. Calm, precise, unshaken. 3. Shooters, left ridge 30 meters above your position. Shift fire now. Hayes relayed instantly. Arouse and Kent pivoted, unleashing controlled bursts. 3 muzzle flashes vanished. The pressure eased just slightly. Falcon again. Enemy squad repositioning on right ridge. They'll try to flank. 2 minutes. How the hell does she know that? Morales shouted over gunfire. Doesn't matter, move, Hayes barked. They shifted, covering angles exactly as Falcon instructed. Seconds later, the enemy did exactly what she predicted, appearing where her voice had warned. The SEALs cut them down before they even fired. But the fight was far from over. The ambushers had numbers, and worse, high ground. The SEALs were skilled, but skill bends under overwhelming fire. Bullets screamed past, ricocheting off stone. The valley filled with dust, smoke, and the metallic taste of blood. Kent hissed over Combs. We're boxed in. Negative, Falcon's voice broke through, sharper now. You have an exit. West Ridge small crevice, 50 meters. Move in pairs, suppress fire, go. Hayes glanced west. At first, he saw nothing, just jagged stone. But then his eyes adjusted, and he spotted it. A narrow slit in the rock. An escape. Falcon's got us a door. We move now. Hayes ordered. The SEALs laid down fire, each man covering the other as they sprinted for the ridge. Bullets chewed the sand around them. One round clipped Morales' shoulder, spinning him down. Hayes grabbed him by the vest, dragging him forward. Morales grimaced, blood seeping, but stayed on his feet. Not today, Hayes muttered, shoving him into the crevice. Inside the slit of rock, the world muffled. Bullets still cracked outside, but the narrow walls shielded them. They pressed deeper, breathing hard, adrenaline surging. The ambush had been tight, too tight. Over Combs, Falcon's voice returned, steady as ever. Count heads. You're? 1 short. Hayes' stomach dropped. He counted quickly. 6 men. 1 missing. Where's Walker? He snapped. No answer. Then a faint voice crackled back. Pinned down East Ridge. Can't move. Hayes swore. Walker had been cut off, trapped under fire. Every instinct screamed at him to go back, but the valley was a furnace of lead. Sending the whole team back was suicide. Before he could decide, Falcon's voice cut in. I've got him. Walker listened carefully. On your left, 2 rocks stacked like teeth. Crawl low, 3 meters. Then stop. Hayes. Cover fire on my mark. Hayes didn't even ask how she knew Walker's position. There wasn't time. Mark, Falcon ordered. The SEALs erupted in synchronized fire, rifles hammering the ridge. Walker crawled, low and desperate, bullets sparking inches above him. Falcon's voice guided him step by step, as if she could see the bullets in slow motion. Now sprint, left angle. Go, Walker exploded from cover, diving toward the slit in the rock. The team hauled him inside, breathless and bleeding, but alive. The ambush still raged outside, but the SEALs were no longer prey. Inside the ridge, they had cover, angles, and Falcon's voice. She directed them like a conductor of war. 2. Hostiles advancing west grenade launcher. Take them now. Kent fired. The enemy fell. Sniper repositioning North Ridge, 80 meters. Used the reflection. Hayes spotted the glint of glass, squeezed the trigger, and silenced the sniper. Every call was precise. Every order saved lives. For the first time, Hayes felt something he hadn't expected. Trust. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, slowly, the gunfire ebbed. The fighters realized their ambush had failed. They melted into the dunes, leaving silence in their wake. The SEALs slumped against the rocks, breathing hard, sweat streaking their faces. Blood dripped from Morale's shoulder, but he was alive. Walker sat trembling, pale but grinning. "Hell of a fight," he muttered. Hayes keyed his calm. "Falcon." "Status?" Her voice came back, calm, as if she hadn't just pulled them from the jaws of death. "Ambush broken. You're clear. Patch your wounded and move before they regroup." Hayes exhaled, long and heavy. He looked at his men. They were battered, bloodied, but alive. Alive because of her. Later, under a canopy of stars, the SEALs rested in silence. Morale's wound was patched. Walker slept fitfully. The others cleaned weapons and checked gear. Hayes sat apart, staring at the desert sky. Falcon's voice still echoed in his head, calm in chaos, certain when everything else was breaking. He thought of what she'd said in Langley. "I see what others don't." Tonight, she hadn't just seen, she had saved. The test was over. The SEALs had shed blood, and in that crucible, trust had been forged. Falcon was no longer a rumor. She was their lifeline. And Hayes knew the war ahead would test them even harder. But now, for the first time, he believed they had a chance. Because they had her. Night in the desert was colder than most men imagined. The same sun that blistered skin during the day vanished behind the horizon, leaving only a thin veil of stars and air sharp enough to cut through bone. The SEALs huddled in a shallow wadi, gear stacked tight, rifles within arm's reach. They had fought, bled, and barely survived the ambush, and exhaustion hung on them like lead. But no one slept. Not really. Not after today. Morale sat with his back against stone, bandaged shoulder throbbing. Walker kept flexing his hands, as if reassuring himself he was still alive. Kent muttered low prayers into the dust. The silence was not their usual silence, the easy quiet of men who trusted each other without words. This silence was heavy, heavy with questions. And at the center of those questions was her, Falcon. Her voice came through their earpieces like a ghost, calm as ever. "Status report," Hayes answered, his tone clipped. "One wounded. Morales is stable. Walker rattled but alive. No Kia." A pause. Then, "Good. You'll move again at dawn. I'll guide you through alternate routes. They'll be searching the valley tonight." Hayes leaned back, exhaling. Even her calm grated on him now. He trusted her judgment. Yes, but trust wasn't the same as understanding. He pulled the earpiece out, set it aside, and looked at his men. Their eyes met his in the dim starlight. They didn't have to say it aloud. The question was carved into all of them. Who is she? It was Morales, wounded but restless, who broke the silence. "I don't care how sharp she is. No one talks like that unless they've been here. Unless they've lived it." Kent frowned. "Could be classified. C.I. a spook. Maybe special ops they buried in the system." Walker shook his head. "Nah, you heard her. The way she knew those villages? The scarf codes? The kite signals? That's not military intel. That's survival." His words lingered. Survival. Hayes said nothing. He knew Walker was right. He'd seen analysts before, men and women who buried themselves in reports and feeds. They spoke in statistics, in maybes and probabilities. Falcon didn't speak like that. She spoke in absolutes. She spoke like someone who had breathed the same dust they did, someone who had run from the same gunfire. And that unsettled him more than anything else. Hours later, when the others finally drifted into restless sleep, Hayes stayed awake. He kept his rifle across his lap, eyes on the horizon. But his thoughts weren't on the dunes. They were on her. On impulse, he pressed his cums. "Falcon, you awake?" A pause. Then her voice, softer now, as if she'd expected the call. "Always." Hayes hesitated. He was a man of few words, but questions burned at the back of his throat. Finally, he asked, "Who are you really?" For a long moment, silence. Only the faint static of the line. Then, slowly, "Do you want the truth? Or the version they told you in Langley?" "The truth." She exhaled, the sound faint but heavy. "I wasn't born Falcon. That's a name they gave me when they couldn't decide what to call me. I was born in a country torn apart before I could walk. My first memories aren't toys or schools. They're gunfire, earning homes, people running." Hayes sat straighter, listening. "My family was killed when I was a child. Not in one moment, not by one side. Piece by piece, war took them. My father disappeared one night, taken by soldiers who never admitted it. My mother died of sickness we couldn't treat because hospitals had been shelled. My brother was shot when he tried to cross a checkpoint." Her voice didn't crack. She spoke as if reciting facts, but Hayes heard the scars beneath the steel. "I survived because I learned to watch. I watched soldiers. I watched convoys. I learned how they moved, how they thought, what they hid. When you have nothing, your eyes become your weapon. Your mind becomes your rifle." She paused, then continued. "I started guiding others' families trying to escape, children trying to cross minefields, refugees trying to avoid patrols. Word spread. Eventually, governments heard about me. Not officially, not on paper, but they came. They asked me to do what satellites couldn't. To see." Hayes tightened his grip on the rifle. This wasn't a spook. This wasn't a career officer. This was someone who had been forged in the fire of war itself. "They used me where they couldn't send troops," Falcon continued. "I helped them, yes, but I was never one of them. No flag, no uniform. Just me. A shadow they called when the battlefield refused to make sense." Hayes' chest tightened. He thought of the stories, the sniper saved in Syria, the demolitions expert in Afghanistan. Not myths, not luck. Her. Always her. "Why are you helping us?" he asked quietly. There was another long silence. Then she answered, "Because men like the ones you fight are the same men who burned my home. Every time I help you, it's one less child who grows up watching their world turn to ash. I don't fight with guns. I fight with sight. That's my war." Hayes didn't speak. For once, words failed him. Morning came with brutal light. The team packed quickly, tension still simmering, but touched now with something else: respect. They didn't know exactly what Falcon had told Hayes, but they saw it in his face. The commander who had doubted her most now carried her words like a shield. As they moved across the sand, Falcon's voice guided them again. But now, the men listened differently. Not as soldiers tolerating a handler, but as warriors following someone who had survived battles of her own. By midday, they reached another village. Smoke curled from clay chimneys. Women carried water jars. Children darted between goats. To most, it looked ordinary. Falcon's voice sharpened. "Stop. Something's wrong. That smoke is too thick, too black. They're burning tires. Not wood. Signal. Pull back." The seals froze. Hayes raised his fist, signaling retreat. Moments later, the village erupted. Hidden fighters poured out, weapons flashing. But the seals were already gone, vanishing behind dunes. "Not today," Hayes muttered. The men exchanged glances. She had just saved them again. That night, around another makeshift camp, the teen finally spoke of her openly. Marals shook his head. She's not just intel. She's one of us. More, maybe. Walker smirked weakly. Damn right. Whoever she is, Falcon's the reason I'm still breathing. Even Kent, the most skeptical, nodded. Doesn't matter where she came from. She's earned her place. Hayes stayed silent, staring at the stars. He thought of her voice, of the pain behind her calm. She was no ghost, no myth. She was flesh and blood, carved by war. And now she was theirs. By the time sleep claimed them, the doubts had faded. The SEALs didn't care about her past anymore. They only cared about one truth. Falcon had saved them. Falcon had earned them. And Falcon, whether she admitted it or not, was part of their brotherhood now. The desert had many faces, but this one was crueler than most. The valley stretched wide and silent, hemmed in by cliffs like jagged teeth. The SEALs moved in staggered formation, boots sinking into sand, eyes scanning every rise and shadow. Their mission objective lay just ahead, a suspected weapons depot hidden deep inside the rocks. Falcon's voice steadied them, as it always did. Thermal scans show faint movement inside the cliffs. No heat signatures in the open. Be cautious too. Quiet is never safe. Hayes raised a clenched fist, halting the line. He studied the valley. The cliffs loomed tall, too tall. A silence pressed heavy, broken only by wind whispering through stone. His instincts churned. Morales limped slightly, his wounded shoulder aching, but he kept pace. Walker scanned with binoculars, shaking his head. Looks empty. Dead empty. Kent grunted. Feels wrong. Hayes agreed. Wrong was exactly what it felt like. But orders were orders. They were to push forward, confirm the depot, and extract. Simple. Too simple. And war never did simple. The entrance came into view, carved into the rock like a black mouth yawning open. Crates lay scattered near the cave, tarps flapping in the breeze. Weapons crates, just as intel promised. Visual on objective, Hayes reported. Careful, Falcon said softly. Don't rush it. Look closer. The tarps noticed the way. They're tied? Hayes narrowed his eyes. At first glance, they looked ordinary, covering cargo. But then he saw it. The knots were wrong. Not tied to secure, but to conceal. A chill ran down his spine. Falcon's voice sharpened. Those aren't supply crates. They're bait. Before Hayes could react, the world erupted. The ground shook with concussive blasts as hidden charges detonated. The valley came alive with gunfire, echoing off stone. From the cliffs above, fighters poured like a flood, dozens, maybe hundreds. They had been waiting, patient predators watching prey walk into the snare. The SEALs dove for cover as bullets rained down. The tarps ripped free, revealing not weapons but explosives wired in chains. The entire depot was a kill zone. Ambush. Move, move, move. Hayes roared, his voice barely audible over the thunder of gunfire. Tracer rounds lit the air. The cliffs spat fire. Morales returned shots through gritted teeth. Kent lobbed grenades up the ridge. Walker cursed as sand exploded around him. But the enemy was everywhere. Too many, too coordinated. Falcon's voice cut through chaos, firm but urgent. Stop firing blindly. They want you pinned. Listen to me. Hayes ducked behind a boulder, bullets chewing stone inches from his head. We're surrounded. Exactly, Falcon replied. And that's their mistake. They've trapped you, but they've trapped themselves too. Hayes blinked sweat from his eyes. Explain. The charges they ringed thee. Valley. It's not just for you. It's insurance. They planned to collapse the cliffs if you fought back too hard. You can use it, Walker swore. Blow the valley while we're inside? That's suicide. No, Falcon said sharply. Listen. The detonators are wired in sequence. If you trigger them selectively, you collapse their cover, not yours. You turn their kill box into a tomb. The SEALs exchanged stunned glances. It was insane. It was desperate. And it was the only way out. Hayes made the call. Kent, you're on the wires. Morales, cover him. Walker, with me, suppress north. Ridge. Kent crawled through dust and bullets, finding the lines snaking from crate to crate. His hands moved fast, cutting, splicing, rerouting. Sweat dripped into his eyes. One mistake, and they'd all be vaporized. Falcon guided him step by step, her voice unwavering. Red wire first. Good. Now bypass the black, don't touch it. It's secondary. Splice green to yellow. Quick. Kent's fingers flew. Sparks snapped. Done. Now, Falcon ordered. On my mark. Trigger it. Mark. Kent slammed the charge. The cliffs roared as explosions ripped through stone. Dust and fire cascaded down, burying fighters in avalanches of rock. The valley shook, a thunderous chain reaction, tearing enemy positions apart. Shouts of panic rose, then were silenced beneath collapsing ridges. The SEALs seized the opening, surging forward through smoke and rubble. Hayes led, rifles spitting fire. Morales staggered but refused to fall. Walker dragged a wounded enemy aside and kept running. They moved like ghosts through chaos, using Falcon's directions to thread through collapsing stone. Left, 10 meters. Downslope now. Every step was survival by inches. Finally, they burst free of the valley's mouth, lungs burning, ears ringing. Behind them, the trap collapsed, fully dust clouds rising like a storm, gunfire drowned by the mountains. Wrath, silence fell. The SEALs staggered into open desert, coughing, bloodied, but alive. They regrouped behind a dune, adrenaline still surging. Morales slumped, pale, clutching his shoulder. Kent's hands trembled from the wiring, still smelling of smoke. Walker leaned against his rifle, chest heaving. Hayes scanned his men. All alive, against all odds. Then he keyed his comm. Falcon, we're clear. The traps collapsed. Her voice came, softer this time, carrying relief she rarely let slip. Good. They won't recover from that. You just cut the head off their network. Hayes exhaled slowly, staring back at the valley. It was rubble, now stone, and dust burying men who had thought themselves hunters. You saved us again, he said quietly, a pause. And Falcon replied, No, you saved yourselves. I just helped you see. That night, as they made camp miles away, the weight of the day sank in. They had walked into death and walked out alive. Not because of luck, not because of brute strength, because of her. Around the small fire, Morales chuckled weakly. Remind me never to doubt her again. Walker smirked. Hell, she's got better aim with her words than I do with a rifle. Even Kent, gruff and skeptical, nodded. We'd be bones in that valley if not for Falcon. She's one of us now, whether she admits it or not. Hayes didn't join the laughter. He sat in silence, staring into the fire, hearing her voice in his head. They've trapped you, but they've trapped themselves too. She saw what others missed. She turned death into survival. And he realized something chilling. The enemy had laid a trap. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't the only ones being tested. Maybe Falcon was being tested too. The desert was quiet again, but it was not peace. Silence after battle was never peace. It was the weight of ghosts. The SEALs had survived the valley trap, but the air still carried the taste of smoke and dust. Each man felt it in his bones. The war was far from done. They bivouacked in the ruins of an abandoned caravanserai, its stone walls cracked and half swallowed by sand. The stars spread wide overhead, but no one admired them. They sat in the shadows, cleaning rifles, wrapping wounds, and thinking. Always thinking. Hayes checked his men one by one. Morales was pale, but holding steady, bandages fresh. Kent had blisters across his palms from handling the explosive wires. Walker still shook when he thought no one was looking. They were alive, yes, but each was carrying something heavier than shrapnel. And at the heart of it was her falcon. Her voice came over Combs at last, softer than usual. You did well today. Walker gave a dry laugh. That's one word for it. Alive's another, Morales added, forcing a grin. Falcon didn't laugh. Alive is the only word that matters. Hayes felt something in her tone, something unspoken. Gratitude? Sadness? He couldn't tell. But it wasn't the calm, flawless steel she always projected. It was human. He set his rifle aside. Falcon, enough dancing around. You've saved our lives more times than I can count. You've seen more than anyone should, but we don't know who you are. We deserve to know. A pause crackled through the Combs. The team froze, eyes on their commander. Then Falcon spoke. You already know who I am. But maybe it's time you understood what that means. The night stretched deep as her story unfurled. I told you I was born in war. That wasn't an exaggeration. My earliest memory is hiding under a broken door while men with rifles stormed my village. My mother's hand pressed against my mouth so I wouldn't cry. I was 4. The SEALs sat still, listening. Even Kent, skeptical to the core, lowered his eyes. I grew up watching men in uniforms decide who lived and who died. They didn't care which side anyone was on. They cared about power. They cared about fear. And they left nothing behind but rubble and children with nothing to hold on to. Her voice didn't tremble. If anything, it grew sharper, cutting like glass. I realized young that survival wasn't luck. It was observation. You had to see what others missed, the tracks in the sand, the way a guard shifted his rifle, the silence that meant a storm of bullets was about to come. I learned to read the world like others read books. And when I began helping others escape, people called me by a word in my language that meant hawk. The Americans translated it to falcon. The name stuck. She went quiet. The men digested her words. Hayes leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. So you're not one of them. Not CIA. Not military. No, she said. I've worn no uniform. I've saluted no flag. And I never will. Then why us? Walker asked quietly. Why this mission? Why put yourself on the line for? Strangers? Her answer was immediate. Because you fight the same men who burned my childhood. Every trap you walk into, I've seen before. Every lie they weave, I've lived through. I help you because if I don't, someone else's village will burn. Some other child will grow up learning to read war instead of words. Her voice faltered slightly, barely noticeable, but the SEALs caught it. I help you, she finished, because it means those children have a chance I never did. The fire popped, sparks rising into the desert night. The SEALs were silent, each man absorbing the weight of her truth. Kent finally broke the silence. His tone was gruff, but softer than before. So that's what Falcon means. Not just a name, a life. Morales nodded slowly. She doesn't fly above us. She flies with us, watching. Walker smirked faintly. Hell, she flies for us. Hayes didn't speak. He just stared into the fire, thinking of all the times she had seen what none of them could. The scarf signals, the ambush patterns, the valley trap. She hadn't just guided them. She had reshaped the battlefield. Falcon, not a code, not a myth. a survivor who had turned her pain into vision. Later, when the men drifted into uneasy rest, Hayes stayed awake. The comm line was quiet, but he knew she was listening. She always was. "Falcon," he said softly. "I'm here." He hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted him for days. "Why didn't you ever pick up a weapon?" Silence. Then, "Because I know what they do. Guns don't just kill enemies. They kill families. They kill futures. My weapon is my sight. It's enough." Hayes exhaled, nodding though she couldn't see. "It's more than enough." For the first time since this mission began, he meant it. The next day, the SEALs moved again, guided by her voice. But something had changed. The way they listened to her was different now. There was no trace of doubt, no lingering suspicion. Each order was obeyed, not because she was in charge, but because she had earned it. She was no longer just Falcon. She was their Falcon. In the blistering heat, Morales muttered through clenched teeth, "Feels like we're her wings." Walker chuckled, "No, feels like she's ours." Even Kent allowed himself a small smile. Hayes kept his eyes forward, but he felt it too. The bond had shifted. They were no longer just a team of SEALs being guided by a distant voice. They were something more, an unlikely fusion of steel and sight, forged by fire and blood. That night, after another day of marching through dust and heat, the SEALs crested a ridge. Below them, in the valley, lay a sprawling compound, the true heart of the enemy's network. Trucks, weapons, fighters moving in patterns. The final target. Hayes crouched low, glassing it through his scope. "This is it." Falcon's voice came, calm but fierce. "Yes, this is where it ends." For the first time, Hayes thought he heard something like pride in her tone. Not pride in herself, pride in them. He lowered the scope, staring at the compound lights. Tomorrow, the war would demand blood again. Tomorrow, they would face their greatest fight. But tonight, he finally understood. Her name was not Falcon, because she flew above the battlefield. Her name was Falcon, because she had been broken, hunted, scarred, yet she had learned to see from the sky, to strike with precision, to endure when all else fell. The SEALs carried rifles. She carried vision, and together they carried each other. In that desert night, beneath stars older than war, the meaning of her name became clear. Falcon was not just a call sign, not just a shadow. Falcon was survival, turned into strength. Falcon was hope, sharpened into a weapon. Falcon was theirs, and tomorrow the enemy would learn her meaning too. The desert dawn came blood-red, washing the horizon in fire. The SEALs crouched low on the ridge, staring down at the compound sprawled in the valley below. Trucks idled, fighters patrolled. Antennas rose above crude buildings, radiating chatter into the night sky. This was it, the hub that fed weapons, money, and men into the war that had scarred the region for years. Hayes adjusted his scope, watching the rhythm of guards, the changing of shifts. His men crouched beside him, Morales, pale but steady. Walker, sharp-eyed, jaw tight. Kent, running fingers across detonators like a pianist, preparing for war. Falcon's voice came over comms, low and certain. "You've found the artery. Cut it, and the body withers." Hayes nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Then let's cut deep." The plan was simple in outline, impossible in execution. Infiltrate, plant charges, collapse the compound from within, and extract before reinforcements swarmed. Simple was always the deadliest word in war. They ghosted down the ridge, slipping through shadows. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The desert smelled of oil and dust, of something metallic beneath. The fighters inside the compound laughed, unaware death crept toward them. At the perimeter, Morale signaled 2 guards. Hayes and Walker moved as one silenced shots. Bodies dropped quietly into the sand. Kent clipped the wire on a rusted gate, and they slipped inside. The compound swallowed them whole. Inside, chaos lived under order. Men shouted in foreign tongues. Trucks rumbled, crates of weapons stacked high. The SEALs weaved through it all, invisible. Hayes led them to the central hub, a squat concrete building bristling with antennas. Falcon's voice whispered directions in their ears, guiding them through blind corners and shadows. Wait, patrol passing. Now left corridor. 2 doors down, storage room, safe entry. Every call was perfect, every step ahead of the enemy. She was there, unseen, turning a maze of death into a path of survival. Kent planted charges in silence, hands steady now, eyes cold. Morales covered him, rifle sweeping arcs. Walker slipped upstairs, clearing rooms. Hayes stood at the center, hearing only his heartbeat and her voice. Then it unraveled. A door burst. Open. A fighter stepped out, eyes widening. He shouted in alarm, rising like thunder. Gunfire erupted. The compound lit up in chaos. Fighters swarmed from every direction, rifles blazing. The SEALs dropped into cover, returning fire indisciplined. Bursts. Compromised, Hayes snapped. Falcon, we need a new exit now. Her voice came instantly. Calm, but edged with urgency. West Wing. Service tunnel under the generator. Go. Leave the charges armed. The SEALs fell back, firing grenades, tearing through walls. The air filled with dust and screams. Kent slammed the final detonator, sweat streaking his face. Charges set, then move. Hayes barked. They fought through corridors, the compound twisting into a storm of bullets. Morales staggered, his wound reopening, but Walker dragged him forward. Kent fired until his barrel smoked. Hayes led, carving a path with sheer will. Falcon's voice was the only anchor. Left stairwell, down. 2 doors, then right. Tunnel hatch 20 meters. The hatch appeared like salvation. They dropped inside, the tunnel damp and narrow, lit only by weak bulbs. Behind them, the compound roared. With pursuit. Detonate, Hayes ordered. Kent hit the switch. The world shook. Explosions ripped the compound apart, flames clawing the sky. Concrete collapsed, trucks erupted, towers crumbled. The artery was severed. The enemy's heart stopped beating. As SEALs burst from the tunnel into open desert. Behind them, the compound burned, a pyre against the dawn. The air trembled with the roar of secondary blasts. The fighters who survived fled into chaos, their network shattered. The mission was over, but survival was not. Falcon's voice guided them once more. Reinforcements are coming. 40 minutes. You must move north, into the dunes. A drone will pick you up. They ran, exhaustion burning their legs, lungs tearing in the dry air. Morales stumbled, but the others carried him. Hayes looked back once, watching the smoke rise, knowing this. War had shifted because of them. Because of her. When they finally collapsed behind dunes, the drone appeared overhead dark, silent, a shadow with wings. Extraction complete. Hours later, they were debriefed in a hidden hangar far from the desert. The brass congratulated them, hands shaking, words of praise falling like empty coins. None of it mattered. What mattered was the voice that had saved them. Yet Falcon was absent. No chair at the table, no recognition. She was already gone, vanished back into shadows. The SEALs stood together, silent, letting the generals talk. They knew the truth. The victory wasn't theirs alone. It had been hers. That night, Hayes found himself outside, staring at the dark horizon. He keyed his comm. Though he wasn't sure if she would answer. She did. Always. You made it, she said softly. We made it, Hayes corrected. Because of you. A pause. Then, because of all of us. But yes, you cut the artery. The body will starve. Others will live now. Hayes swallowed hard. Why disappear? Why not stand with us? You've earned that. Her answer came, like wind through the calm. Because I was never meant to stand in the light. My war isn't medals or briefings. My war is sight. And there's always another battlefield waiting. Her voice faded, leaving silence. Hayes stared into the night, heavy with understanding. The SEALs never saw Falcon again. Not in person. Not in flesh. She remained a voice, a shadow, a presence they carried in memory. But her name lived on among them. When new recruits asked about the impossible mission in the desert, about the trap turned into victory, about the compound reduced to ash, the veterans only smiled. They never mentioned Langley. They never mentioned orders. They spoke a single name, reverent, unshakable, Falcon. And so her meaning endured. She was not myth, not rumor, not code. She was the unseen eye that saved them, the survivor who turned scars into strength, the silent warrior who fought with vision instead of guns. She was proof that not all heroes wear uniforms. Her name was Falcon, and the Navy SEALs would never forget what it meant.